What's up, guys? My name is Steve. This is The Phantom Show. It's the start of yet another week, which means it is time for another episode of Mondays Suck. We don't talk a lot about sports on this show, even though sports definitely count as fandoms, because there are people who are passionate about all kinds of sports and all kinds of teams and all kinds of athletes within those sports. It's a really big thing. So it's not that we ignore it deliberately, it's a really big beast to take on. And usually when you're talking about fandoms, you're talking more about pop culture fandoms, which is what we're focused on. But sports fandoms are very valid, and we're going to start giving those a little more attention here because I think it's the right thing to do. So, in consideration of that, here on Monday Suck tonight, we are talking about the XFL. Not today's XFL. We'll get to that in a little bit. But I'm talking about the original XFL that was launched by Vince McMahon back in 2001. For some reason, Vince decided that he wanted to get into football, so he launched the XFL as a competitor to the NFL. Well, I say competitor, but the idea was that the XFL would compete during the NFL offseason so they could try to get some interest that way and not actually directly compete with the NFL. There was only a small handful of XFL teams, mostly based in major cities throughout the United States. Nobody was quite sure what to make of it at first, and unfortunately, in connection with the WWE, which at the time was known as the WWF, the XFL became this kind of weird blend of wrestling and football. So like wrestling, it had promos and backstage angles and funky stuff going on, but they were legitimate football games. The games weren't fixed, at least officially they weren't. There's a theory that some of them may have been, but never proven. So it was supposed to be a legitimate athletic competition with this sort of pro wrestling inspired scripted side story stuff going on. If it sounds lame and confusing, that's because it was lame and confusing. The inaugural telecast of the XFL actually did pretty good. It do something like a 8 point something rating on a Saturday night, but within weeks the games were drawing very low ratings. In fact, towards the end of the season, one of the games drew a rating so low that it is at the time was the lowest rated television program ever in the United States. Yes, that's right, the lowest rated program ever. Even some weird TV show you've never heard of from the 1970s, it drew more ratings than this particular game in the XFL. The season did finish, they played their $1 million championship game, and because the ratings were garbage and nobody really liked the football, it disappeared after that. It was really never spoken of again for the most part. Why did the XFL fail? Well, again, the football wasn't top quality, of course. All the best football players are in the NFL. So the XFL had to kind of get the leftovers, and if you're doing that, you're not going to have the best quality of football. Secondly, the league only had one season. If you're starting a new sports league, you're not going to get the best of the league and the teams and the players and everything else after only 1 year. It's the same thing starting really anything. If you start a new business, you're not going to get the best out of that business for a few years. So after only 1 year, they just didn't have a chance to gain any traction. And then there was the weird pro wrestling aspects. And I think the WWF and the people who invested in this kind of overestimated how much overlap there was between football and wrestling fans, because there's really not as much as you might think. They're out there. I like wrestling. I like football sometimes, but I don't necessarily like wrestling with my football. I think they were much better as entirely separate entities. So the XFL, I think, had some interesting concepts and ideas, but in the end, it was just thought of as a joke because even the company behind it sort of treated it as a joke with the pro wrestling elements and all of that. So this thing, in my opinion, was destined to fail. Yet for some strange reason, almost 20 years later, Vince McMahon decides to jump in and resurrect the XFL. Yep, didn't even bother to change the name. He said the XFL is coming back. We're basically doing similar to what we did last time, but there's a few important changes. They got rid of the whole stupid wrestling gimmicks and backstage segments and all that crap. They wanted to make it more legitimate. Still playing in the NFL offseason, still with teams in major U.S. cities. They actually got off to a half-decent start, and then the COVID-19 pandemic killed it. But believe it or not, there are plans for the league to get back on the field starting next year. So there may be a few breaths of life left in the XFL. Now, of course, I'm talking about the current iteration of the XFL and not the pile of garbage that we got back in 2001. It remains to be seen whether this current XFL will make it. I have my doubts. It hasn't gone too well so far for either iteration, but we'll see what happens. Ultimately, the 2001 version, though, was a hot steaming pile of crap that is best forgotten. And if you don't know anything about this, then you are luckier for it. That is all we have for tonight. I will be back soon with more stuff. Thank you, as always, for watching.